3 days without food. That's what homelessness meant for Marcus Thompson, a 52-year-old veteran whose sacrifice for his country had been forgotten by everyone except himself. But when he saw the little girl crying on the park bench, clutching an empty sandwich wrapper, his own hunger became irrelevant. What he didn't know was that his simple act of kindness was about to reach the highest office in the state. Welcome to Stories Worth Telling. Before we begin this powerful story of sacrifice, hope, and unexpected miracles, please let us know in the comments which city you're watching us from today. And if you believe stories like these deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us ensure they're never forgotten. The autumn storm swept through the city with unusual fury, sending sheets of rain across empty streets and forcing most people indoors. But for Marcus Thompson, weather was just another obstacle to endure. He pulled his torn military jacket tighter around his shoulders as he made his way through Riverside Park, his worn boots splashing through puddles that reflected the dim streetlights. At 52, Marcus carried himself with the straight-backed posture that never quite leaves a soldier, even when everything else has been stripped away. His graying beard couldn't hide the sharp jawline that had once commanded respect in barracks across 3 different continents. Now, those same features were gaunt with hunger, weathered by 2 years of sleeping under bridges and in doorways. He'd been counting the days since his last real meal. 3 days of surviving on nothing but water from public fountains and the occasional piece of fruit discarded outside grocery stores. His stomach had stopped growling hours ago, settling into the hollow ache that had become his constant companion. The weight of his backpack felt heavier with each step, though it contained precious little: a change of clothes worn thin from countless washings, a small camping spoon that had somehow survived every loss, and tucked deep in the bottom, wrapped in plastic to keep it dry, one precious can of chicken noodle soup. His emergency meal. The difference between hunger and starvation. Marcus found his usual shelter under the park's old stone bridge, a place where the homeless gathered when the weather turned violent. But tonight, even that refuge was empty. Everyone else had found somewhere warm to wait out the storm. Everyone except him, and apparently, someone else. Through the rain, he spotted a small figure huddled on a bench about 50 yards away. At first, he thought it might be another homeless person, but as he squinted through the downpour, he realized it was a child. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting completely alone in the middle of a raging storm. Marcus's instincts kicked in immediately. 25 years in the Army had taught him to assess situations quickly, and everything about this scene was wrong. Children didn't sit alone in parks during storms, not unless something terrible had happened. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. As he got closer, he could see she was crying, her small shoulders shaking with sobs that were barely audible over the rain. She wore what had once been nice clothes, a pink sweater and dark pants, but they were now soaked and muddy. In her hands, she clutched what appeared to be an empty food wrapper. "Hey there," Marcus called out gently, staying a respectful distance away. "Are you okay?" The little girl looked up with wide, frightened eyes. Even in the dim light, Marcus could see they were green, bright and intelligent despite her obvious distress. She didn't answer, just stared at him with the cautious fear that children learn when they've been taught about stranger danger. Marcus held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "My name is Marcus. I'm not going to hurt you. But you shouldn't be out here alone, especially in weather like this. Where are your parents?" "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "I was supposed to meet my daddy after school, but he never came. I waited and waited, and then it started raining, so I came here to hide." Marcus felt his heart clench. He'd seen enough abandoned children in war zones to recognize the particular kind of fear in her eyes, the fear of being truly alone in the world. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sophie," she said, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Sophie Martinez." "That's a beautiful name," Marcus said, taking a careful step closer. "Sophie, how long have you been waiting here?" She shrugged, a gesture that seemed too mature for someone so young. "Since school ended, I think. I think maybe something happened to my daddy. The storm intensified, and Marcus watched as Sophie shivered violently. Her lips were starting to turn blue, and he could see she was hypothermic. Whatever had happened to separate her from her family, she was in immediate danger of exposure. Sophie, I know you don't know me, but I think we need to get you somewhere warm and dry, and we need to find your daddy. I can't leave, she said firmly. What if he comes looking for me here? Marcus nodded, understanding her logic even as he worried about her condition. He looked around and spotted a small pavilion nearby with a partially covered seating area. How about we move over there where it's a little drier? Sophie hesitated, then nodded. Marcus helped her to her feet, noticing how small and fragile she seemed. As they walked to the pavilion, he couldn't help but think about his own daughter, Sarah, who would be about Sophie's age now if she were still alive. The memory hit him like a physical blow, as it always did. Under the pavilion's partial shelter, Sophie sat on a wooden bench, while Marcus tried to think of what to do next. He had no phone, no money, and no way to contact authorities. But he did have one thing, a can of soup he'd been saving for an emergency. It was literally his last meal, the only food he had to his name. Sophie, he said gently, when did you last eat something? She held up the empty wrapper in her hands. I had a granola bar for lunch at school, but I'm really hungry now. Marcus looked at the wrapper, then at Sophie's pale, pinched face. The decision was instant and absolute. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the can of chicken noodle soup, along with a small camping spoon he'd managed to keep through all his struggles. I was saving this for later, but I think you need it more than I do, he said, working to open the can with his pocket knife. Sophie's eyes widened. But then you won't have any food. Marcus smiled, and for a moment, the years of hardship seemed to fade from his face. Sweetheart, I've been hungry before. I'll be okay. But you're just a little girl, and you need to keep your strength up while we figure out how to find your daddy. As Marcus opened the can of soup, Sophie watched him with a mixture of gratitude and concern that seemed far too mature for her age. The simple act of sharing food had created an instant bond between them, the kind that forms when two people recognize genuine kindness in each other. My daddy always says I shouldn't take food from strangers, Sophie said quietly, but her eyes never left the soup. Your daddy is very smart, Marcus replied, carefully portioning the soup into the can's lid to cool it down. But sometimes, in emergencies, we have to accept help from people we don't know yet. I promise you, Sophie, I only want to help you get back to your family safely. Sophie studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but what's your last name, Mr. Marcus? If you tell me yours, then you won't be a stranger anymore. Despite everything, Marcus found himself smiling. Thompson, Marcus Thompson, and I used to be in the army, which means I spent a lot of years learning how to take care of people and keep them safe. Like a soldier? Sophie's eyes lit up with interest. Exactly like a soldier. Marcus handed her the makeshift bowl of soup. I served 3 tours overseas, and one of the most important things I learned was that sometimes the best thing you can do is take care of someone who needs help. Sophie accepted the soup gratefully, blowing on it carefully before taking her first spoonful. The relief on her face was immediate, and Marcus felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with food. This is really good, she said between bites. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You're very welcome, Sophie. As she ate, Sophie began to open up. She told Marcus about her school, about how she was in 2nd grade and loved reading books about animals. She talked about her daddy, who worked in a big building downtown and always picked her up after school. Today had been different, though. Her teacher had waited with her for almost 2 hours before finally having to leave, and Sophie had started walking toward where she thought her father's building might be. I got lost, she admitted, looking embarrassed. All the streets look the same when it's raining. Marcus listened patiently, his experienced mind already putting together a clearer picture. Sophie's clothes, despite being muddy now, were expensive. Her speech patterns suggested education and privilege. Most telling of all, she'd mentioned that her father worked in a big building downtown, the kind of vague description a child might give for a government office or corporate headquarters. "Sophie," he said carefully, "what kind of work does your daddy do?" She scrunched up her face, thinking, "He has a lot of meetings, and people are always asking him to make decisions about things. Oh, and he has to travel a lot to talk to people in other cities." The description could fit dozens of professions, but something about the way she said it made Marcus think of someone in a position of significant authority. He made a mental note to ask more specific questions once she'd finished eating and warmed up a bit. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and Marcus realized they might be stuck here for hours. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around Sophie's shoulders over her wet sweater. It was far too big for her, but it was dry and would help her retain body heat. "Tell me about your family," Marcus said, settling onto the bench beside her but maintaining a respectful distance. "Is it just you and your daddy?" Sophie's expression grew sad. "My mommy died when I was 4. I don't remember her very much, just that she smelled like flowers, and she used to read to me every night." She paused, then looked up at Marcus. "Do you have a little girl?" The question hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. For a moment he couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Sarah's face flashed before his eyes. Bright brown eyes, pigtails, gap-toothed smile. Gone at age 6, along with her mother, in a car accident that happened while Marcus was deployed halfway around the world. "I did," he said quietly. "Her name was Sarah. She died a few years ago." Sophie's small hand found his and she squeezed it gently. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson. That must make you very sad."
"It does," Marcus admitted. "But talking to you reminds me of all the good things about her, like how kind you are, and how brave you're being right now." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain drum against the pavilion roof. Marcus found himself thinking about the strange turns life had taken. 3 years ago, he'd been a decorated sergeant with a promising military career ahead of him. Then came the accident, the devastating loss, and the slow spiral into depression and homelessness that followed his early discharge. He'd lost everything, his family, his home, his sense of purpose. Yet here he was, in the middle of a storm with no food and no shelter, and somehow he'd found something he hadn't felt in years, the ability to make a difference in someone else's life. "Mr. Thompson?" Sophie's voice broke into his thoughts. "Yes, sweetheart." "Are you hungry? I only ate half the soup." Marcus looked at the can and realized she was right. Despite her obvious hunger, Sophie had stopped eating when the soup was only half gone. "I'm saving the rest for you," she explained, "because you shared with me, so now I should share with you." The simple generosity of the gesture nearly brought tears to Marcus's eyes. Here was a child who had been lost, frightened, and hungry, yet her first instinct was to share what little she had with someone who had helped her. "That's very kind of you, Sophie, but you need to eat more than I do. You're still growing." "My daddy says sharing is one of the most important things people can do," Sophie said firmly. "He says when we share what we have, even when we don't have very much, that's when we're being our best selves." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, struck by the wisdom in her words. Here was a 7-year-old girl teaching him something about humanity that he'd somehow forgotten during his years of struggle and loss. "Your daddy sounds like a very wise man," Marcus said finally. "He is," Sophie said with absolute certainty. "He always knows what to do. That's why I'm not scared anymore. I know he's looking for me right now, and you're helping me stay safe until he finds me." What Sophie didn't know, what neither of them could have known,
was that her disappearance had triggered the largest search operation in the state's recent history. 20 miles away, in the Emergency Command Center hastily set up in the state capitol building, Governor Elena Martinez stood before a wall of monitors displaying search grid maps, weather patterns, and coordinated response teams. Governor Martinez was a woman who had built her career on remaining calm under pressure. But tonight that composure was cracking. For the past 6 hours, every available resource had been deployed to find her daughter. State police, National Guard units, FBI agents, and hundreds of volunteers were combing the city in search patterns that expanded outward from Sophie's school.
Ma'am, we've checked every building within a 3-mile radius of the school, reported Captain Sarah Chen, the lead coordinator of the search operation. We've also interviewed everyone who was at the school today, including teachers, staff, and other parents. Governor Martinez nodded tersely, her eyes never leaving the central monitor that showed Sophie's school photo. What about the traffic cameras? Any sign of her on the surrounding streets? We're still reviewing footage, but the storm is making visibility difficult. We did get one possible sighting about 4 hours ago near Riverside Park, but we haven't been able to confirm it. Riverside Park, the governor repeated. That's almost 2 miles from the school. What would she be doing there? It's possible she was trying to walk to your office building downtown and got turned around, suggested Agent Rodriguez from the FBI team that had been called in due to potential security concerns. The park is roughly in that direction from the school. Governor Martinez felt her heart clench. Sophie had visited her office dozens of times and was proud of her mother's work. It was entirely possible that a frightened 7-year-old might try to walk there if she thought something had happened to her scheduled pickup. "Double the search teams around the park," she ordered, "and get me a direct line to whoever is coordinating the ground units in that area." What the governor didn't know was that her carefully organized search teams had been systematically checking every obvious shelter in the park, the visitor center, the public restrooms, the playground structures. But they hadn't thought to look under the small pavilion where Marcus and Sophie had taken refuge. It was too exposed, too obvious a place for someone to hide during a storm. Meanwhile, under that very pavilion, Marcus was becoming increasingly concerned about their situation. The storm was getting worse, and he could see that Sophie was still shivering despite his jacket and the warm soup. More importantly, he was starting to piece together clues that suggested Sophie's disappearance was much bigger than a simple case of a lost child. "Sophie," he said gently, "I need to ask you something important. What's your daddy's full name?" "Rafael Martinez," she said without hesitation. "But most people call him Governor Martinez." The words hit Marcus like a lightning bolt. Governor Martinez, the state's highest elected official, the woman whose face had been on every news broadcast for the past 2 years as she'd fought for veterans' benefits and homeless services, the same woman whose policies had indirectly helped fund the few programs that had kept Marcus alive during his darkest months. Marcus's mind raced. If Sophie was Governor Martinez's daughter, then her disappearance would be headline news by now. There would be search teams, police units, possibly even federal agents looking for her. And here she was, sitting next to a homeless veteran in a park pavilion, completely unaware of the massive operation that was undoubtedly underway to find her. "Sophie," Marcus said carefully, "your daddy's job, does it involve making decisions for lots of people in the state?" "Uh-huh," Sophie nodded. "He helps make laws and stuff, and he tries to help people who don't have homes or jobs." She paused, then looked at Marcus with sudden understanding. "Like you?" The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Here he was, a homeless veteran being helped by the policies championed by Governor Martinez, now protecting her daughter without either of them initially knowing the connection. "Yes," Marcus said quietly, "like me." He stood up and walked to the edge of the pavilion, looking out into the storm. In the distance, he could see searchlights moving through other parts of the park. They were looking for Sophie, he realized. Probably had been for hours. The question now was what to do about it. Marcus could try to flag down one of the search teams,
but he was also acutely aware of how the situation might look. A homeless man alone with the governor's daughter in an isolated location during a storm. Even with the best of intentions, he could easily be seen as a threat rather than a protector. "Mr. Thompson," Sophie's voice called him back to the moment. "Is everything okay?" Marcus turned back to her, struck again by her trust and innocence. She had no idea that her simple act of sharing soup with a stranger was about to change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," he said, making his decision. "But I think it's time we tried to get you back to your daddy." Marcus spent several minutes weighing his options. He could see searchlights moving through the park, getting closer to their position. The smart thing would be to stay put and let the searchers find them, but he was worried about Sophie's condition. She'd stopped shivering, which could be a bad sign in cold weather exposure. "Sophie, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, kneeling down to her eye level. "I think your daddy has people looking for you, and they're going to find us soon. But when they do, there might be a lot of confusion and excitement. I want you to remember that I only helped you, okay? I gave you food and kept you warm, and I never hurt you or scared you." Sophie looked puzzled. "Of course you helped me. You're my friend now. Why would anyone think different?" Marcus smiled sadly. "Sometimes adults get worried and don't think clearly, but no matter what happens, I want you to know that meeting you tonight has been the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time." Before Sophie could respond, they heard voices coming through the rain. Multiple voices, organized and urgent. The search teams were close. "Sophie Martinez!" The call echoed through the park. "Sophie, if you can hear us, call out!" Sophie's face lit up with relief and excitement. "They're looking for me!" She started to stand, but Marcus gently caught her arm. "Wait just a second," he said. "Let me call to them first, okay? That way they'll know everything is fine." Marcus stepped to the edge of the pavilion and cupped his hands around his mouth. "Over here," he shouted. "She's safe. Sophie Martinez is here and she's safe." The response was immediate. Multiple flashlight beams swung in their direction, and Marcus could hear radios crackling with urgent communications. Within minutes, a team of 4 police officers emerged from the rain, their flashlights creating a circle of light around the pavilion. The lead officer, a sergeant with 20 years' experience, took in the scene quickly. A young girl wrapped in a man's jacket, sitting calmly on a bench, and a bearded homeless man standing protectively nearby. His hand instinctively moved toward his weapon, but something in the tableau made him pause. "Sophie," the sergeant called out. "Are you Sophie Martinez?" "Yes," Sophie called back excitedly. "This is my friend Mr. Thompson. He gave me soup and kept me warm." The sergeant approached cautiously, speaking into his radio. "Control, this is Unit 47. We have eyes on the missing child. She appears to be on—" Marcus slowly raised his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I found her here about an hour ago, alone in the storm. She was hungry and cold, so I shared my food with her and gave her my jacket." The sergeant studied Marcus's face, noting the hollow cheeks and worn clothing, but also the clear eyes and protective stance. Years of experience had taught him to read people quickly, and everything about this man's body language suggested a protector, not a predator. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back while we assess the situation," the sergeant said, but his tone was more cautious than aggressive. "Of course," Marcus replied, moving away from Sophie but not taking his eyes off her. "I just wanted to make sure she stayed safe until you found her." One of the officers, a woman with EMT training, knelt down beside Sophie to check her condition. "Hi, sweetie, I'm Officer Martinez. How are you feeling?" "I'm okay," Sophie said. "Mr. Thompson took really good care of me. He gave me his last food even though he was hungry too." Officer Martinez glanced up at Marcus with new interest, then back at Sophie. Did he hurt you in any way? Did he touch you inappropriately or say anything that made you uncomfortable? No, Sophie said firmly. He was really nice. He told me about his little girl Sarah, and we shared soup, and he gave me his jacket so I wouldn't be cold. He's a good person. The sergeant was speaking rapidly into his radio, updating the command center. Within minutes, the pavilion was surrounded by additional personnel, including paramedics who began checking Sophie's vital signs and a federal agent who immediately took charge of the scene. "Mr. Thompson," the agent said, approaching with a neutral but alert expression. "I'm Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. I need to ask you some questions about how you came to be with Sophie tonight." Marcus nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I found her here, sitting alone in the rain. She'd been waiting for her father to pick her up from school, but he never came. She was hypothermic and hungry, so I shared my food with her and tried to keep her warm." "And you had no prior knowledge of who she was?" "Not until she told me her father's name was Governor Martinez," Marcus replied honestly. "When I realized who she was, I knew you'd be looking for her. I was trying to figure out the best way to get her back to safety when you found us." Agent Rodriguez studied Marcus for a long moment. The man's story was consistent with what the child had said, and there were no obvious signs of deception. More importantly, Sophie clearly felt safe with him and was showing no signs of trauma or abuse. "Mr. Thompson, we're going to need to take you in for questioning. You understand. This is standard procedure in any case involving a missing child, especially one of this profile." "I understand," Marcus said. "I just want to make sure Sophie gets back to her family safely." The paramedics had finished their assessment and were preparing to transport Sophie to the hospital for a more thorough examination. As they lifted her onto a gurney, she called out to Marcus, "Mr. Thompson, will I see you again?" Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I don't know, sweetheart, but you take care of yourself, okay? And remember, you're one of the bravest people I've ever met." Sophie smiled, still wearing his jacket over the blanket the paramedics had wrapped around her. "You're brave too, and kind. I won't forget." As the ambulance pulled away with Sophie inside, Marcus was placed in the back of a police car for transport to the station. He wasn't under arrest, but he wasn't free to go either. As they drove through the city streets, he looked out the rain-streaked window and wondered if he'd ever see Sophie again, or if this would be just another brief encounter in a life full of temporary connections. The interrogation room at the downtown police station was exactly what Marcus had expected. Bare walls, fluorescent lighting, and a metal table with chairs that had seen better decades. He'd been here for 3 hours now, answering the same questions from different investigators, each one trying to find holes in his story or inconsistencies that might suggest something more sinister than simple kindness. But then the door opened, and Governor Elena Martinez walked in. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged from what had clearly been hours of crying and stress. She looked like what she was, a mother who had nearly lost her child. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I'm Elena Martinez." Marcus stood up reflexively. "Governor Martinez, how is Sophie?" "She's fine," the governor said, her composure finally cracking. "The doctors say she's in perfect health. She's asking for you, actually." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. "She told me what you did," the governor continued, "how you shared your food with her, gave her your jacket, how you protected her during the storm." She paused, studying his weathered face. "Sophie told me you've been homeless for 2 years. Do you know who championed the veterans programs that have helped keep you alive?" Marcus met her eyes. "You did." "That's right, which means we've been taking care of each other for years without knowing it. I helped create the programs that kept you alive, and tonight, you saved my daughter's life." She leaned forward with determination. "Mr. Thompson, I want to offer you a job. Veterans Affairs Liaison and Homeless Services Coordinator. You'd work directly with my office to help design programs for people in situations like yours." Marcus stared at her, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Governor, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not qualified." "You have something more valuable than any degree," she interrupted. "You have lived experience, and you've shown that even in your darkest moments, your first instinct is to help others." 6 months later, Marcus stood in his new office, looking out at the city where he'd once slept under bridges. On his desk sat Sophie's drawing, 2 stick figures sharing soup under a pavilion, hearts drawn around them. The phone rang, and he answered it with purpose. "Veterans Services, Marcus Thompson speaking. How can I help?" On the other end was David, a young veteran he'd met at the shelter months ago. "Mr. Thompson, I got your card. I think I need help." "I'll be right there," Marcus said, grabbing his coat. Some things never changed. When someone needed help, you showed up. But now, instead of having only a can of soup to offer, he had resources, hope, and the unshakable belief that kindness truly could change everything.